Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. Meriam Ibraham was sentenced to death for apostasy in Sudan. Her crime? Marrying a Christian man from southern Sudan in 2011. Despite being raised Christian by her mother, she was given the death penalty for marrying a non-Muslim. Her sentence was overturned earlier this week, but she was rearrested on Wednesday as she was about to leave Sudan. Today, she is again free after heavy international diplomatic pressure, much of it coming from the U.S. Here to unpack what has happened, I'm joined by the chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Please welcome Professor Robert George back to the program.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back, Raymond.
So in May, Ms. Ibraham was convicted and she was sentenced to death by hanging. What happened?
Well, she was sentenced for two crimes, two alleged crimes. One was apostasy, and you're right. Despite having been brought up as a Christian, she never knew herself to be anything other than a Christian. The fact that she had a Muslim father meant that, as far as the Sudanese regime was concerned, that she was a Muslim, and therefore, if she became a Christian, that was apostasy. So she was sentenced to death for apostasy. She was also sentenced to 100 lashes for adultery. Now, the theory there is, as a Muslim woman, allegedly Muslim woman, marrying a Christian means that you have committed adultery. It's an invalid marriage. She had children, so the marriage had obviously been consummated. So she was sentenced to 100 lashes. This, by the way, occurred while she was pregnant, expecting her second child. That child has now been born in prison with the mother's legs in iron. Now, it's a terrible thing that this woman has been through, suffering for her faith as a Christian, refusing to renounce her Christian faith. But we have, at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and others in the United States, in our government and in other governments, and lots of people praying. In fact, she has been released. The order of execution has been lifted.
The husband has dual citizenship.
Yes,
correct?
that's right. He's an American. He's actually an American citizen living in New Hampshire. That's right. Now, let me tell you where they are as of this moment. They went to the airport and were detained again at the airport, this time on charges of forgery and fraudulent papers. Well, we spent a day or more with that situation. Again, we and others were pressuring for her release, pressuring the government for her release. And now she has been released on bail, but not permitted to leave the country. So she's out of jail, thank God, but she's still being held in Sudan against her will, she and her family, and they want to come to the United States. And we need to continue praying, we need to continue acting, and we at the Commission are going to continue advocating until we get Ms. Ibraham and her entire family here in the United States safely.
How unique is this case?
Raymond, I wish I could tell you that it's unique. Fortunately, it has gotten publicity. So many cases where apostasy laws are enforced to violate people's fundamental religious freedom to follow their consciences in matters of belief and to change religions if their consciences take them there. So often these cases happen, people are punished, even killed, and there's no international outcry, or often it's not even known outside the country. So I wish I could say that this was a unique or rare case. It's not unique, and it's not even all that rare.
Robert George, she had evidence that she was a Christian.
Yes.
She submitted that to the court. It was rejected. Why?
Was rejected on the theory that she had a Muslim father, and therefore she was a Muslim. Now, she didn't know. That father disappeared from the family early on. She never knew herself to be anything other than a Christian. She was brought up a Christian. She was always a Christian. She was never a Muslim. And yet, she was considered a Muslim for legal purposes, and this was imposed on her, and she was placed in jeopardy of her very life and forced to have her baby with her legs in irons in prison.
Now, these diplomatic efforts had apparently a great effect on her release. What are you all doing now? What are you hearing from congressmen and senators? Are they continuing the pressure now that the poor woman can't leave the country?
Yes, I mean, we're all keeping the pressure up. Now, we all need to be praying. I think even more important than diplomatic efforts is prayer. We as Catholics certainly believe that. So do our Protestant and Jewish and Muslim friends who are friends of liberty and friends of religious liberty. But the diplomatic efforts are important, and putting the pressure on the government, the rhetorical pressure in itself is valuable. And there have been leading members of Congress, Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Marco Rubio, for example, who've been outspoken on this issue, keeping themselves informed, which is good for politicians to do rather than just reading talking points. Congressman Frank Wolf, Congressman Christopher Smith, so many other good members of Congress have been speaking out, and that's good. People in the churches, and I love to see this, people in the churches, religious leaders speaking out in support of this woman. And again, it's not just her fellow Christians. crimes. There have been Jews who've been in leadership positions on this, and even Muslims who have been, who recognize that what is being imposed here is an outrage.
There was an announcement today that the president is urging Congress to train the Syrian rebels and to help them in their efforts there. What effect will this have on the religious minorities, particularly the Christians, in Syria, and how might this bleed over into Iraq?
I am very concerned, Raymond, about the situation in Syria because, frankly, as far as I can tell, based on the briefings that we have received at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, there are religious freedom abuses being committed by all sides in this Syrian civil war. There are, as far as I can see, no good guys. Maybe there was a time early on when we had an opportunity to arm forces that would have created a government that was more benign and more respectful of basic civil liberties. If there was such a moment, it has been lost, and the situation now is very dire. So I have to say, and I'm speaking here in my own individual capacity, my fellow commissioners might have a different view. I'm here not speaking for the commission, but in my individual capacity, I must say that I'm very wary and concerned about arming the rebels, or arming anybody, or siding with anybody in that dispute. Such a tragedy. Christians are leaving Syria, and some of the Christians, Raymond, who are leaving Syria are Christians who left Iraq under the pressure of persecution there in the aftermath of that war, and now they find themselves packing their bags again and fleeing.
Now we see this situation unraveling in Iraq. You have this Sunni-Shia battle royale playing out, but it's deeper than that, Robert. As you read the reports, as I talk to people on the ground, it's Sunni versus Sunni in some of these instances. They're burning and destroying Sunni mosques. What is driving this?
Well, one of the things that is at issue here, of course, is who is going to be in control, even within the Sunni community. And the forces that seem at the moment to be ascendant are those of the most radical, the most extreme, also the best funded and best organized of the radical elements. ISIS makes Al-Qaeda look like a gang of amateurs. So we are in big trouble as far as Iraq is concerned. And it's entirely possible that you could get an ISIS victory there, spreading then to Syria. That puts Jordan in jeopardy. And of course, the big prize they have their eye on is ultimately Saudi Arabia. People say that's impossible. That is not impossible. So the possibility of an effort to establish a caliphate on radical Islamist principles of the sort you see in ISIS is a very real threat.
I want you to put your legal hat on for just one moment. I need you to analyze this big Supreme Court decision on these 35-foot buffer zones. The court said these exceed free speech requirements guaranteed by the Constitution. What does this really mean? How might this affect the other cities that have these 35-foot buffer zones around those abortion clinics?
Well, Raymond, I'm here again speaking in my individual capacity, this time as a constitutional scholar. Yeah, that's right. As my Princeton professorship is what I'm speaking under here, rather than my role at the Commission on International Religious Freedom, which of course has no position on these kinds of issues. But this is a great victory for free speech, and it's a unanimous court. Both the liberal and conservative elements on the court all agreed that this restriction on free speech to keep pro-life activists more than 35 feet away from
and counselors in many cases.
Many of them counseling women, and to permit pro-abortion speech but not anti-abortion speech within the buffer, that this is unconstitutional. And they're right. This is a plain violation of the First Amendment. This should never have come to court, and the court certainly did the right thing here. Now, there's a division, though, within the court. There's a 5-4 division. You see it in Justice Scalia's concurring opinion.
And Alito wrote another concurring opinion that quibbles with the decision they signed on to.
But the difference there is the question, just really a factual question, whether the regulation, which everyone agrees was unconstitutional, 9-0, whether the regulation was unconstitutional in part because it was not content neutral in its restriction on speech. The majority was willing to say, well, we can accept that it was content neutral as to the content of the speech. Scalia, in my view, entirely rightly said, that's a lot of nonsense. This is not content neutral. It's very content specific. It's trying to create an exception to the First Amendment for pro-life speech. And I myself would have joined, if I were on the court, in Scalia's opinion. But the key thing is that the First Amendment was vindicated free speech was vindicated. And this will mean that throughout the country, these kinds of buffer zones will no longer be able to be maintained, and people will have the right to advocate.
Very good. Robert George, thank you so much for your insight and your advocacy on these important issues of religious and human freedom.